This episode, as always, is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. Playoffs kick off over the weekend. Major League Baseball is in full swing. SeatGeek has got you covered on the tickets to all of these games and more. Download the SeatGeek app or go to SeatGeek.com. Buy some tickets to something, but before you go to checkout, little promo code box. Do me a favor, enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk. You're going to get $20 off of that first purchase. Head to SeatGeek.com or download the SeatGeek app today. Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And coming off my first foray into television, my name is Nick Saveri.
Oh, that's right. Look at that. He even got his name right. All right. We're going to get into that in just a second as well, and how Nick's little daughter made an appearance on national television for the first time ever. On the program today, a crazy week last week over on Capitol Hill. The House finally passed aid for Ukraine and Israel, as well as a possible TikTok ban part 2. If you missed it, Nick and I are going to break it all down. Plus, you ever been on an airplane, folks? I think everybody here has been on an airplane. Well, you may not get on an airplane after you hear what Nick and I have to play for you in our final segment. Another crazy hearing, two panels last week on Capitol Hill in everything that's happening with respect to Boeing, different airlines, the Alaska Airlines issue with the door that fell off mid-flight. You've had a couple Southwest airline flights. All of these are Boeing airplanes. There was some whistleblower testimony that happened last week on Capitol Hill. Nick and I are going to take you inside of everything because as somebody who flies frequently to go on those television networks that Nick just mentioned before, I think I'm going to be driving, but more on that in our final segment. Before I say hello to Nick Saveri, all new episode of Back Your Play with Q is out there over on Leon Media Network, or listen to it wherever you get your pods. Q's got a great episode this week. He breaks down the NBA gambling scandal involving Raptors forward Jonte Porter. He's got a great guest, somebody that's actually working with the betting operators, because this is something I've talked about, right? The kind of the hypocrisy, right? The NBA is like, you can't do this, you can't do that. However, the pregame is presented by DraftKings and the postgame is presented by FanDuel. Rich breaks all of that down on the latest episode of Back Your Play with Q. So go over there and check it out on LeonMediaNetwork.com or listen to it wherever you get your pods. Also on LeonMediaNetwork.com, the all-new episode of the Ask the Experts podcast. This past week, Kern was in Brooklyn for the Ryan Garcia-Devin Haney fight. If you missed all of that, he had interviews with Antonio Tarver, with Ryan Garcia, with Haney, all at the weigh-in that happened Friday. Obviously, the fight was Saturday night at Barclays. If you missed that fight, go watch it on the Zone, or you can go listen to all of the great interviews that Curran did around that fight over on the Ask the Experts podcast, or listen to it wherever you get your pods. Also, great episodes out there of Educate US. If you lead them, obviously, Can We Please Talk? Go follow all of our shows, on social media. Follow us, Can We Please Talk Podcast, IG, Twitter. On Twitter, Can We Please Talk? On TikTok, Can We Please Talk Podcast? All right, now I say hello. There's too many things, Nick. I can't keep doing all these reads every time before you and I start up. Let's get into it. How are you doing? You did your first television appearance last week. I got you on TV there. I am a dream weaver. We've been doing this show now for 4 years. You looked good. You had the bookshelf up. You got an education topic. Obviously, maybe we'll dive into it. Maybe you guys will dive into it on the education show, but a little bit about Florida's new bill that was signed in by Governor DeSantis, teaching the dangers of communism coming up in school. I don't want you to get into the topic here, but tell me, what was your takeaways of finally doing TV? Also, how are you doing, by the way?
Good. It's funny. I saw my older kids soccer game today. They were 2-0. They're now unfortunately 2-1. And it's funny. It's not. I don't know if you necessarily live vicariously through your kids, but the frustration is just real.
All good things. All good
2
things
weeks in a
come to an
row.
end.
Yeah. Well, 2 weeks in a row, they're so much more talented than their opponents, and they just give up early goals, and they always play from a deficit. Last week, it worked to their advantage. They ended up coming from behind and just blowing them out in the second half. Today, they were just constantly chasing, and at the end, they gave up one bad goal, and
What
Never
is
went.
this? A post game recap show? What are we doing here?
It's what's in my head right now. But I'm good though. I'm good. Took me a little while to get over the loss, but yeah, we're gonna be okay. We got practice tomorrow, so we'll have to turn things around. But on that note, though, next week actually my oldest does celebrate her ninth birthday, so we're
Nice.
getting ready for that. So it's gonna be fun. On the other side of it, in terms of the other kid, obviously, those of you who watched NTD News on, I think it was Friday, or if you see it on the internet, will get a chance to see my little one, briefly on television. I was very much like that BBC reporter who, I think a couple
Yeah.
years ago, famously, you can see the little one run in the room, and then like the mom comes in and grabs the kid.
I think it was the maid, not the maid, the babysitter, like the nanny that
Yeah,
ran
yeah.
in. Yeah.
And so I didn't obviously I didn't have the luxury. I mean, I was just, I had thought doing a hit that early in the morning, the kids are both gonna be asleep and it's smooth sailing. Wrong. As Charlie Murphy would say on the Chappelle show.
I gotta be
Uh,
honest. It's pretty funny. You can go check out the video over on our YouTube channel. Type in "Can We Please Talk" podcast, and you can, because you see Eliza's little head like coming walking in. But the thing is, you drew attention to it by saying, "Oh, I think I have a visitor." But at the time you said that, you weren't fully on screen. They had you like in a corner shot with like a running video montage playing. So you couldn't see her. And one of the things I wanted to tell you, I'll bring it here because we're already talking about it. I wanted to tell you, like, you shouldn't have brought attention to it because nobody would have noticed it if you hadn't said anything, because on camera you couldn't see to. And again, go watch the video for everybody. It was pretty funny. But what were your impressions of finally, getting on television and getting to talk about stuff that you like talking about in the education space?
it was cool. It was I mean, I felt prepared. I mean, they sent over the general areas of discussion they were going to go into with me, and a really helpful article just to sort of build up my context around the conversation. It's nothing I haven't heard before. And the point I was trying to get across is that, there's always a room for suspicion for something coming out of Florida's education department for a litany of reasons. There's merits to this bill. And again, I'll direct everyone to the video to hear more. But
We,
um,
Wait, real quick, but you know what's funny now that you've finally gotten to do one, and maybe you'll do a few more as well as we get more into as more and more people listen to our show, we get more into networks. Now you kind of see how the sausage is made. You kind of see why you can't go back and forth. Like you just said, you're going to spend what, 10 minutes? You're not going to get 10 minutes. A, B, you've got to give a quick response. And sometimes you don't get to articulate everything you want, which is why TV works for certain people that want quick stuff, 3-4 minutes, which is why podcasts work for people that want to dive into the topic, 45 minutes, an hour, like what we do. I love that now you kind of see how tough it is, at least a little bit, to try to do something and kind of get your points out there. Because what people don't realize about doing television is you can practice, but you don't want to sound rehearsed. And that's the biggest thing that I always tell people when they're about to go on, is like, you can practice for this stuff and you can look up your stuff and make sure that your data points are right. But it's one thing to practice it, and then it's another thing to go out there and verbalize it. It's not as easy as it looks. Right? I think you would agree now. Would you agree with that? It's not as easy as it looks. I mean, I think you agreed with that anyway.
I don't know if I would say necessarily as easy. I mean, I think it's a question of, are you being approached with a question or an area that you have some familiarity with? So in matters of education, period, end of sentence, sure, by all means, like, fire away. But they also have the benefit of, it's a news story, getting you're getting a chance to read up a little bit on that conversation. And then I did some deep dive on myself. I don't think you see it during the interview, but yeah, I've got a printed copy of what the state of Florida's, at least the state Senate's, provisions were. And I, like, day before, I start reading through it, highlighting it. So for 4 minutes, there's a fair amount of prep work, which I would argue to anyone who ever says, well, people go on television, they say whatever they want. You do, but you could tell the difference between those who have some level of preparation and those who don't. To
Right.
what you're saying about those who sound prepared and canned, that's a good example of why I think Ron DeSantis lost those primaries, because this was a person that needed everything completely the way, his talking points lined up. And anytime he got a question that was sideways, his lack of preparedness, like, you could see from that just goofy smile and robotic demeanor he would have. Like, he's
Right.
great with staying on message, but any type of alteration to that, the robot just goes on fritz at that point.
Yeah, it's like when you got to freestyle it. He can't freestyle. All right, let's go into our first segment here because last week was a crazy week on Capitol Hill. I want to touch on a bunch of different things, but obviously the first and foremost thing that is top of mind of what happened over the weekend, the House on Saturday voted on a bipartisan basis to pass a $95 billion foreign aid package for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan in there, and a new TikTok ban legislation piece as well that now limits and shrinks the amount of months that ByteDance has to divest or sell the company, before it was 9 months. Now they've reduced it down. All of this legislation, obviously Speaker Johnson was out talking to the media. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he said. He also got asked a question you're going to hear in the montage here from a reporter of, hey, man, this took forever. Why did it take forever? What took so long? Take a listen to this.
I said these are not normal times. They're not. The world is destabilized, and it's a tinderbox. It's a dangerous time. Three of our primary adversaries, Russia and Iran and China, are working together, and they're being aggressors around the globe. And they're a global threat to our prosperity and our security. Their advance threatens the free world, and it demands American leadership. If we turn our backs right now, the consequences could be devastating. So this afternoon, the House acted, and we sent over to the Senate, and it will be transmitted shortly, our supplemental national security legislation.
It took too long for aid to Ukraine, and maybe too long. Why you decided to do it right now?
Listen, the House had a lot of important work to do here. We had to get the government funded in our appropriations process. We had to reauthorize the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We had a lot of important measures that had to be done, and we got to this as quickly as we could. This is an important matter. I think it's timely. I think you've heard from leaders around the world, including in Ukraine, that this is being done on a timely basis, and the House had to have the time to deliberate and do this in the right manner.
So a lot of nothing there. We got through this as quickly as we could. Well, we've known for months that the war has been happening. Obviously, the war has been almost 2 years in now. So this has been an opportunity for them to do this for the last couple of months. And it finally took Speaker Johnson a slim majority. Obviously, they're down to one vote right now because of Representative Mike Gallagher leaving as of April 19th. He's only down to one actual vote if he wants to pass legislation. This funding package passed 311 to 112 with one member voting present to approve the aid. Nick, a lot here, but obviously now the funding that will be able to $61 billion will now go to Ukraine in this funding package. One thing that Speaker Johnson mentioned last week, I want to kind of give him a little bit of credit for this because I'm not sure if people heard him on, I believe it was either Thursday or Friday. He was speaking about how this war is now coming home to him. He has a son who's in the service academies, and he doesn't want to send his son to go fight in a war. History is going to judge us from this, and we need to stop Putin's aggression. We need to stop this Russia, China, Iran alliance that it seems like where the wars are popping up, obviously in the Middle East and what's playing out in Ukraine and what China would potentially do next with Taiwan based on what Russia did and their aggression into Ukraine. So it was weird to me because it's finally him saying what House Democrats have been saying for a while now, and other moderate Republicans that are in the Problem Solvers Caucus of this is why it's imperative to get Ukraine funding through the door, like Representative Mike McCall from Texas has been saying, who's on the House Armed Services Committee. And then the other part that was funny was we've been talking about this, and we had Representative Glenn Ivey to talk about this about at the time before Congress was on a break, this motion to vacate the speakership, and Marjorie Taylor Greene was thinking about bringing it. Representative Thomas Massey was like, let's do it. I'll co-sign. I'll second the motion. Now Representative Paul Gosar was like, I'll third the motion. Mike Johnson played chicken with these people. And guess what? On Saturday, they didn't bring up the motion, not saying that they still won't, but they didn't bring it up. And Johnson worked with Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, got this through the door, and he realized that he needs to work with House Democrats. And it's like Representative Ivey told us, Speaker McCarthy did the same thing. And then the next day he went on TV bashing the Democrats, which is why they voted against him when the motion came up to vacate the speakership. Curious to see how things will play out now if Marjorie Taylor Greene ever brings that up. But I said a lot there. What'd you make of first the bill, second what he just said in his comments there about history will judge us, and it was imperative to kind of get this thing passed? And what do you make of finally bipartisanship over on Capitol Hill?
Speaker Johnson sounds an awful lot like Mitch McConnell now. Senator McConnell has been saying, has greenlit the aid to Ukraine for a long time, and it sounded very much like an old school American member of Congress, in the sense of this was the tone that we would have had in the 80s, with the Soviet Union. So it was very odd that Mike Johnson, very early on in his tenure as House Speaker, kind of towed the line about supporting Ukraine, but then also trying to make a point of, in terms of the point of order of how this worked in the House, and trying to establish priorities. And now he's singing a very different tune. It does make me wonder why that's the case. I do think it's a little laughable to hear House Republicans, him especially, talking about there was so much to do, because I would like to know what that is, because currently House Republicans, for the most part, have tended to be more obstructionist than proactive about trying to get anything passed. We've had numerous members of Congress here, and a few of them have noted that they are part of the term, this particular period of Congress, where they will go down as probably the least active in terms of getting bills passed. So I'd like to know, other than making sure that the federal government continues to be funded, what actually was going on in Congress. You and I this morning, you'd sent over to me a funny graphic from the New York Post that basically pointed to one particular member of Congress having not supported this bill, and kind of making it out to be, I think she may have been had like a Soviet, like Soviet
It's like
Union,
a Russian hat. Yeah, like one of those hats from Seinfeld. That
right. And this was, of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia. Now, I will say, I do want to come to her defense a little bit, shocking as that is to say. Mike, as you brought up the breakdown of the vote for $60 billion in Ukraine aid, of course, this number comes to me from the Washington Post. But of the Democrats, 210 supported this bill, with only 3 not. So out of 213 members of the Democratic Party in the House, 210 voted in support of. The Republicans, however, more did not than actually did. So 101 Republicans voted in favor to 112 who opposed it. 4 did not vote, 1 present. That breakdown is important, because if Republicans try to position themselves as turning the corner on Ukraine, I would have to call BS on that. I also would laugh at the New York Post a little bit, because if you're going to put up a picture of Congresswoman Greene, then you may as well put up a picture of the other 111 people who voted against this. Let's not put this as though it's just her, being in opposition. The majority of House Republicans don't support this bill. And that goes to a bigger question about what is the reticence of not standing up to Putin in the form of providing military aid to Ukraine. I'm still baffled by it. I will say, from a financial standpoint, I am a little tired of constantly funding, the rest of the world. I know that sounds crazy for a liberal like me to be, willing to, want to pull the strings back on funding, but at some point I do have to ask, like, what are we doing? That being said, you of course have to continue supporting the Ukrainians. Everything short of providing our own soldiers on the front line, which is what Congressman Johnson's concern is. Like many people that do not want to have our soldiers on the line right now. So if we have to instead use weapons to make our presence felt there and to support the Ukrainians, then that's what we're going to do. But I was a little baffled by the idea if there's so much to do. And it is very interesting to see Congressman Johnson's turn, because that is definitely a different tone that he had early on when this conversation was coming up.
By the way, funny, you not representing, but you in the corner of Marjorie Taylor Greene is something I did not have on the 2024 bingo card. That New York Post cover was pretty funny, and it just kind of shows the editorial freedom that they have over there to make silly covers like that. But you are right. I wanted to get into the bill real quick. $60.84 billion will go to Ukraine. This will help with weapons supply for them. Still a little unclear in terms of how the new military funding is going to work for Ukraine, and they may require some further actions by Congress. We'll see. $23 billion is going to replenish the U.S. weapons stocks and facilities. $26 billion is for Israel, which obviously is a point of contention for a lot of different people with respect to what is happening in Gaza right now. $9.1 billion is going to go to humanitarian needs for the people of Gaza and the war that's taking place. And I asked Representative Moulton about this back in November when, after the attack by Hamas in Israel. And I asked him about this duality of, helping with the war, but then also helping with the cleanup of the war. It's just so strange to me, again, as a non-military person, with family in the military. We've had former military folks on this show, and we thank them for their service. This is not about them. This is more about the actions of the people in leadership roles, and giving $26 billion to Israel to help them in this fight to eradicate an ideology, which is probably impossible to do, according to military experts, and then juxtapose that with giving $9.1 billion in humanitarian aid. I don't know if people are going to look in the bill intricately like you and I do on this show, Nick, and that's the purpose of the show, to kind of comment on it. And then we bring on the subject matter experts who are actually the ones voting yes or no on these bills. And we've had some of those on. $8.12 billion is going to go to Taiwan as well, for money for the Indo-Pacific. So there's a lot in this bill. The other thing that came through before we go to the break here, Nick, in this, and House Republicans kind of put this under the cloak of night in this bill here that a lot of people may not know about, was they passed legislation that would ban TikTok in the United States if the social media platforms, ByteDance, the China-based owner that owns TikTok currently, if they don't sell the stake within a year. So House Republicans included TikTok within this larger foreign aid package. Obviously, the other bill that we had Representative Jasmine Crockett on to talk about, when that passed in the House, that did not get approved in the Senate. So this is now a new standalone bill. It's got a shorter 6-month selling deadline. It passed by an overwhelming bipartisan vote. I think 360 to 58. Now it goes to the Senate. And now it's an additional, like I said, about the selling or divesting, whatever ByteDance has to do. It would be an additional 3 months if a sale is in progress. So they've got 9 months to sell it. Within the time, if they negotiate a sale, they get an additional 3 months before they have to sell it. What did you make of, just real quick? I mean, again, we talked about this and the social media presence. TikTok is very influential with respect to, and just like other social media platforms, a lot of people, according to polls, get their news from non-traditional sources. They don't go to the big three of the television networks anymore. They go to X, aka Twitter. They go to Facebook. They go Instagram has been suppressing it a little bit, just as Facebook has, but they go to TikTok. There's 160 million active users in the US alone. So they go there and the algorithm feeds them what it feeds them. What did you make of this bill? And again, we've talked about it at a high level, but it didn't get passed in the Senate the first time. So now here goes another way to kind of, put a little bit more salad dressing on it and take it back out to the patron. Do you think it will pass in the Senate?
Before I get there, I did want to go back just a second. You brought up the package to Israel. I think where my brain feels a little broken with that is this idea that, you've got 17 billion in weapons. This is from the Washington Post. 17 billion in weapons for Israel and around 9 billion of humanitarian assistance for Gaza and elsewhere. It's a little mind-bending because we're saying to ourselves, we're going to keep providing weapons to our ally, the very same weapons that will cause the need for humanitarian help. Yep. That's just bizarre. It feels like you're trying to satisfy two sentiments, which in this country we are clearly seeing. We are seeing very much a pro-Israel faction in this country, and a growing voice that is asking for a ceasefire and very pro-Palestinian. So as I see those numbers, like it basically net zeros essentially, right? But essentially more toward weapons than humanitarian aid. So, right. But as far as the TikTok matter goes, first off, and I'm going to show my age here, I think we should all be alarmed that the majority of people, a growing number of people, get their news, quote unquote, from TikTok. TikTok videos often are maybe like most of the videos that you watch, probably a little under a minute, maybe a little less. The fact that people are forming their views that help inform their political habits or their voting habits, perhaps spending habits, their overall mindset based on freaking TikTok is baffling to me. Not even baffling, it's sad. There, I said it. If you are a TikTok user and you listen to the show, thank you for doing so. I ask you to question yourself. If you've moved away from reading newspapers or trusted sources, I'm sorry, I do not count TikTok as a trusted source. That being said, we're still in the place of what I'm fascinated by, because if this goes through, we are telling a company that because of who owns you, we have concerns about security matters and information sharing, despite the fact that, again, as we've talked about here with Representative Jasmine Crockett, and I've shared this data before, it's not the biggest data breach historically. I mean, there's companies that have had far bigger data breaches. We're not bringing those folks in front of Congress and getting their country of origin incorrect. Shout out to Tom Cotton and I forgot what state he's from. So, but I'm curious where the Senate lands on this. If I'm a betting person, shout out to John Tay Porter, I still don't think this passes. I think there's still enough level-headed people that are going to realize the very real precedent of what happens if the United States moves forward with this. So I think it dies within the House, but it's still a fascinating conversation that we're prepared to make this decision because of who basically we consider owning TikTok.
I think you make the most compelling argument that I have not heard. And again, I don't watch C-SPAN regularly where I'm glued to, arguments on the floor of the House or the Senate. I do encourage people to go watch those sometimes. You can see some of those back and forth as people go their turn and their allotment within the couple of minutes that they're allowed. But I think you're right. Like there's been other data breaches with other companies and you haven't seen the level of ire, especially with ones involving your credit score that have your social security data. TikTok doesn't collect stuff like that. They collect other types of data points. So interesting to see where that plays out. All right. Speaking of Capitol Hill, all of this stuff, when we come back after the break, we're going to find out before you book that window seat on your next flight, make sure it's not a Boeing plane. More on that when we come back after the break. Nick, today's episode is presented as always by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Since 2009, their passion has always been bringing you gourmet coffees from all over the world, roasted fresh to order. I got my coffee snob here, Nick Saveri. Nick, tell these people, coffee snob it up here. Tell these people why Fresh Roasted Coffee is so good and why they're the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk.
Often the best cup of coffee that you're ever going to have is the one you can make from home. And you need good quality coffee to do that. And that's what Fresh Roasted Coffee offers. Between single origin, between blends, flavors, anything on the coffee spectrum they've got. But more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, often when you purchase coffee, you don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many different varieties, so many different opportunities, so many different things you could choose from. And Fresh Roasted Coffee just gives you a very simple questionnaire and just says, hey, figure out what your coffee cup is. Figure out what blend works for you. I've gotten some single origin recommendations, so has Mike, and that's influenced everything. And what they recommend, you can get in a Keurig cup, the way Mike takes it. You can take it in the way I do it, which is typically through a French press, or you can get it for a percolator. Whatever coffee machine you've got, they've got you covered. But more importantly, just a huge variety and a way to learn more about coffee itself.
And all of this is available at freshroastedcoffee.com on their site. One cup is all it takes to fall in love with Fresh Roasted Coffee, but you get a discount for being a listener of Can We Please Talk. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Get 20 to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. All right, before we sign off here, Nick, I wanted to talk about this because last week, I was on a segment on a news show talking about the two panels that happened with respect to the Boeing company. The Boeing is, If you don't know who Boeing is, folks, Boeing makes our airplanes. Okay. They also do some stuff for the military. They have military contracts. They make 60% of their revenue from commercial airlines. There's 10,000 jets that are flying across different airline carriers from United to Southwest, Delta, and the like. And 39% of their money comes from military contracts and what they supply for the United States military. Well, on Capitol Hill, when a couple of whistleblowers that formerly used to work at Boeing, one of them was an engineer, Sam Salapur, and there was another guy who was there, a former Boeing manager, Ed Pearson. And they went on Capitol Hill to talk about this gross neglect that Boeing has had with respect to manufacturing, with respect to safety. They said things have been, almost like forced plane parts have been forced together from the manufacturing plant, and they've passed inspection, not rigorous inspection, and nothing that the FAA has done to come down on this. And because of all that, there are planes out there right now that are operating that over time could deteriorate and lead to crashes like what we saw in 2018 and 2019 in two different countries. Take a listen to a little bit of what played out on Capitol Hill, excuse me. First, let's listen to Sam Salapur, and then we'll listen to Ed Pearson and his testimony. Take a listen.
Boeing hit problems, pushing pieces together with excessive force to make him appear that the gaps don't exist, even though they exist. The gap didn't actually go away, and this may result in premature fatigue failure. Effectively, they are putting out defective airplanes. I repeatedly produced reports for my supervisors and Boeing management demonstrating that the gaps in the 787 not being properly measured or shimmed in two major joints of the 787. Evaluating from the 29 inspected airplane data, I found gaps exceeding the specification that were not properly addressed 98.7% of the time. I want to repeat that. 98.7% of the time, the gaps that they were supposed to be shimmed, they were not shimmed.
Boeing routinely states that their airplanes meet or exceed all safety standards. This is untrue and misrepresents the safety of the airplanes. The company illegally removed thousands of quality control inspections on individual airplanes without the FAA's knowledge and without the knowledge of the airlines. Although many of these inspections have been reinstated, hundreds of airplanes have left Boeing factories without those thousands of inspections.
So there was that panel that was a couple of former Boeing employees. Then there was another panel that featured somebody who worked for safety culture at NASA, another aerospace engineer that was talking about some of the foundational practices for an organization. And a lot of it was really aimed at the culture behind Boeing. Why is this so important? Senator Ron Johnson, who was on the committee along with Senator Richard Blumenthal, he went first and he kind of explained why we need to kind of investigate this. Take a listen.
Let me point out, I think the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the tremendous pressure society-wide to keep these planes flying. I mean, if we were to literally ground stop 737s, what would happen to our economy? That's why we don't even like contemplating that reality.
So you heard him there at the end, the overall culture of Boeing. And look, folks, this is not something that, Nick and I made up here. This is like a litany of issues that have been happening with Boeing. January's door blowout on their 737 MAX plane for the Alaska Airlines flight that obviously everyone knows about. The mask, came down in the cabin as the pressure, very scary for folks. If you're flown at any point, you would know. I mean, I don't know what would happen if the seat in front of me, just the door blew out. And now I'm very close to potentially meeting my death if somebody had been sitting there. Nobody was sitting at that seat or it happened to be like one of those like in between door panels. 5 years ago, two MAX Boeing planes crashed tied to faulty flight control software that killed about 346 total people in Indonesia and in Ethiopia. Pearson also said in a hearing that the FAA could have prevented this. Again, this is an ever increasing list of production quality defects. Instead, they've surprised each time it occurs. They show how ineffective and reactive their oversight has become. As somebody who, like I said, flies frequently, this hearing was very ear opening to me. There was a lot of times where, and you heard in the clip there, you made a face as that was playing, Nick, about Sam Salapur saying that they're making defective planes and they're putting them out there. Now, again, aviation is one of statistically the safest methods of transportation, but again, that's comparative because there's more cars out there and then there are airplanes in the sky. What did you make of kind of what I've played there, a little bit of what you heard from the hearing itself? Like, what are some of your overall impressions about Boeing being on trial here, or at least on the House floor and the Senate floor, excuse me?
Yeah, I think it's very alarming. I think you have people that are coming forward that are noticing that there are dangerous and reckless business practices that are taking place at Boeing, and their warnings are not being heard. There are, of course, some upcoming staff changes at Boeing, courtesy of, this is obviously courtesy of CNBC, but, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun is stepping down at the end of this year, although he should be stepping down like now. Chairman of the board, Larry Kellner, is not coming back up for re-election this year. CEO Stan Deal, who's head of the commercial airplane unit, is out. Was effective immediately as of March 25th. That's not nearly enough of the change that has to take place. I imagine as a stock, Boeing takes a massive nosedive, and I'm no pun intended here, and I'm not trying to be funny about that. That's embarrassing. That's absolutely embarrassing from the top on down, that there is this ability to be so reckless with their daily operations that endangers anyone. If you are booking a flight, and I'm not looking at any travel service right now, but oftentimes when you do look up the plane that you're getting on, you can, if you do dig enough, and I've had this conversation with other folks about, like, do you want to try to find out if the jet you're getting on is of a particular plane or a particular company like Boeing that you don't want to fly with at the moment? You can find this out. I would advocate for people to do so. I think this is an opportunity. This reminds me of a little bit of the work that companies like Consumer Reports does. For folks that are like Mike and I age, we remember those reports coming out about just regular products and just kind of keeping us in the loop on what to be more careful of. And in the case of Boeing, one of the largest manufacturers of airplanes in this country, this is very unsettling. And I think again, there's been some shakeups currently in leadership. It needs to continue. There needs to be some form of rededication to providing quality service. These shortcuts that they've taken are embarrassing and reckless. And if it results in any casualties, they need to be sued into non-existence. This is the effort of a company trying to cut costs. And they do this at the detriment of all of us. And Mike is right. I mean, statistically speaking, it's still far safer to fly a plane. But as someone like myself who travels every couple of months now, I certainly would be more mindful of being concerned about traveling on Boeing. And I think we all need to be.
Yeah, I think one of the big things, and I said this on TV as well, because I got asked, what could come next? Can Congress do anything? Well, one of the committee chairs, Maria Cantwell, who's a Democrat out of Washington, she pledged to move a bill through the House chamber responding to Boeing's problems and the FAA's oversight by the year's end. And the biggest thing that was a takeaway for me from the hearings was, and you kind of heard this echoed a little bit from in the hearing, because the hearing's about 2 hours long, and I encourage people to go watch it over on YouTube. It was that the FAA, the NTSB, the Department of Transportation, these are regulatory agencies that are supposed to oversee these folks. The FAA is supposed to say, this is subpar. It's not up to standard. Boeing is prioritizing speed, expediency, so they can get their fleet and their planes out there because they have to deliver them to these airline carriers. If right now there was an issue, and you heard Ron Johnson say it in the clip there, and they've got to pull the 737s, that's going to affect all of us. There's going to be less flights for all of us to take, et cetera, et cetera. And so at the core of it, it's always money. And they're putting money ahead of people's lives. And like my friend said to me, and I don't want to continue to joke about it because it is putting your life at risk getting on a Boeing plane. But he said this to me in joking. If it's a Boeing, I'm not going. And I got to be honest, I may drive as well, man. All right, we leave it there. As always, for the video portions of our episode, if you want to check us out over on YouTube, type in Can We Please Talk Podcast. We should pop right up. Do me a favor while you're there. Hit the subscribe button. Audio podcast platforms, you know by now, Apple, Spotify, Google. Shout out to everybody that listens to us over on Good Pod. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. Can't do without them. Can't do without each and every one of you that supports Nick and I each and every week. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
I'm Nick Severi.
We'll see everybody next time.